Good morning, Talk Straight family. This is Gina Coulter. I hope everyone is doing well. I'm excited to share this word with you this morning, and it's coming to you from a story that most of us probably know well about the fall of Jericho. I just love this story with all the little nuggets that are in it. So I'm going to give those to you this morning. And as we know, this is when the Israelites, they're coming out of Egypt. They're making their way out of all their years in the wilderness. They're about to go in, crossing the Jordan. They get to Jericho. They put fear into people because of the power of God that was upon them. That everywhere they went, they defeated majority of all the armies that they came up against. And so here they are at Jericho, and we see again in verse 1, where it's talking about the people of Jericho were afraid because the Israelites were near. So they closed the city gates and they guarded them. No one went in the city and no one came out. But obviously they didn't realize the power of God that was with them, that they were going to destroy and going to take that city. And no matter what walls they put up, that God was going to tear those down. And that's what we get to see in this story that I love. So Joshua instructs them and he tells them, march around the city with your army once a day for 6 days. On the seventh day, you're going to march around the city 7 times and have the priests blow the trumpets as they march. So Joshua goes through and he's telling them some other things. And we go down to verse 10. And Joshua says, do not give a war cry. And here's where I kind of sat for a minute. And so I looked up a war cry, which, knowing what it means just in itself, a way that is showing aggression to try to thwart off your enemy, to gather those that are in your tribe together to make noises or sounds or actions to scare your enemy, right? And Joshua tells them, don't do this. And that is kind of where I sat and I camped out for a minute because I was like, why would he want to tell them to not do a war cry? And then as you go on in the story, into verse 16, it says, the 7th time they marched around and the priests blew their trumpets. Then Joshua gave the command, now shout, the Lord has given you this city. The city and everything in it are to be destroyed as an offering to the Lord. And that's where I put the two together. And I was like, wow, this is so amazing and so only God that he tells them, don't do the war cry. We don't need to scare anybody because we know the power of the Lord. Because if you're reading and you go back, let's see, even from verse 8 until we get to verse 16, who did they have with them? They had the ark of the Lord with them. God himself was going with them through this whole thing. So they didn't need to do a war cry. They didn't need to scare anyone, because they had God himself with them. He was already fighting for them. He already knew what this story was going to look like. There was nothing they needed to do to scare their enemy except to just keep marching with the promises of the Lord, to keep marching knowing that God was in front of them and behind them, and he gave them protection and he gave them guidance, and that he would lead them so long as he did what they told him to do. And here's the interesting part. When you read in verse 16, they didn't shout before the 7th time. They shouted after the 7th time they marched around the city. Joshua said, now shout. Why? I think in that, when I'm reading that, right, he says to them, now shout, the Lord has given you this city. In other words, we are shouting because the Lord has given us victory. He's given us be able to defeat our enemy. That this shout is in a shout of praise because God has defeated the enemy. And I think about, right, this happened after the 7th time, which we all know 7 is the number of completion. And so as I thought about this, I was just like, wow, that's really cool. It's like, even for us, putting it into our humanness, right? Of oftentimes we go through whatever these trials are and situations that we might be facing, those valleys that seem to be so deep and so dark and so heavy. And God's saying, you don't need to do the war cry to scare off your enemies, because if you are with me, if you are my child, you are marked by me already. And Psalm 139:5 says that he goes before us, he goes after us, and he puts his hand upon us. So in those places that we don't know answers, in those places that we might be scared and we're walking in fear, in those places that we're going through those difficult things where we wonder how God's going to make a way, all we need to remember, just like happened here, is that God is with us in everything. And we don't need to do a war cry to scare our enemy, because God already knows he's already going to get the victory. That's all we need to do, is keep shouting to him in praise, because he's going to take care of us. He's going to provide for us. He's going to lead us. He's in front of us. He's in back of us. He's all around us. And I just thought that was such a powerful thing, sitting and just going through this morning. I pray that it encourages you in whatever you need. And just the reminder of, sometimes we go through things and we get in those places. I think Jeremiah has talked about this before. Rafina's talked about this before. Those places you get in your head when you're going through things and you start questioning and you start just letting things get in your head. And it's in that place that I share this with you, of just to remind yourself of how good God is, that his hand is on you, in front of you, behind you, all around you. His hand will be upon you, that we don't need to scare off our enemies, because God is with us. And so long as God is with us, our enemies can't touch us. And all we need to do is continue to put our hands up in praise for the victory that we know that the Lord has. I hope you have an amazing week. See you soon. Bye.